Last Monday, the 1st of June, was the day that South Africa stumbled into lockdown level 3. Although we eagerly anticipated this milestone, there were many aspects that seemed to catch us by surprise. Parents had no idea whether to make school lunch or not. Runners weren't certain if they could join groups, and golfers, rather sadly, looked to the heavens to check the weather and looked for some sort of sign that they could once again participate in an activity that they know brings out the worst in them, and one that they swear that they will never play again. Worshippers are still waiting for a sign, perhaps not from heaven, but as to whether their institutions will open, and we continue to read real news, fake news, and Facebook news as though they are medical journals. The more confident we seem to become, the less knowledge we seem to have. It is Sunday, it's June the 7th. This is the Synthesis Podcast. I'm Howard Feldman. A very good morning. For the 13th Sunday in succession, I welcome COVID expert, pulmonologist, Dr. Anton Meyberg. Good morning. Let's begin with the numbers.
Good morning. So today is currently day 5 billion, 5,000, 100 billion, gazillion, trillion days of lockdown. Mm-hmm. And as we carry on with the lockdown, we're currently sitting on 6,984,602 cases worldwide, with 402,000 deaths and 3.4 million cases resolved. The United States are sitting on 1.98 million cases with 112,000 deaths. Now, I've been asked a number of times by people why I keep on bringing up the United States. And I think it's very important because the United States are seen as a first world country. And if it can happen in a first world country, then it can happen in a third world country. No one is immune from the virus. South Africa currently sitting on 45,973 cases with 952 deaths and 24,000 cases resolved. There are currently 1,815 people in hospital throughout South Africa with COVID-19, with 119 people being ventilated. And the epicenter is still in the Western Cape, with over 30,000 cases in the Western Cape and 5,000 cases sitting around Gauteng at this point in time. Now, if we look at the trends, and please God, we don't follow the trends, but the estimated trends done by the actuaries and the statisticians show that by the 5th of July, if we carry on this foreseeable track, then there will be about 23,000 infected cases in Gauteng with 184 deaths, and the Western Cape will be 155,000 cases with 3,800 deaths. So please God, we don't carry on with that note. But on that note, it's more important to note that we've got to continue with our public distancing, our social distancing, our hand washing, our masks, and just look at the overall picture, knowing that the mortality rate in South Africa is currently 2%, which is much lower than the global mortality rate of 6% at this point in time. So that's a bit of a positive taken out from that.
Is there a tipping point? What kind of facilities do we have in terms of ventilators, ICU beds? Is there a point that we get to where it just becomes completely unmanageable? And are we heading in that direction?
So that happened in Italy, that happened in New York, and it's a possibility that can happen, especially in the Western Cape, if they go according to these trends. But if we look at the 90-day sort of statistics and data, our first case was reported on the 5th of March, and we're 90 days from that case. If we look anywhere around the world, we've done more tests for any country related to that time period, and we had a better stage because we had previous warning of the virus. Now, are there enough ventilators? I know that Baragwanath yesterday got a donation of 20 ventilators. Are they using any of them? Not yet. But if we go on our current trajectory, and if the Western Cape continues as the way it is, then there are not going to be enough hospital beds, and they will have to start using all the field hospitals that are setting up, and they will require more medical personnel, auxiliary personnel, and people to help them with the cases.
What are you seeing in the hospitals that you're involved with?
The numbers are definitely doubling. More people are coming into hospital and they are sick, and we're only trying to admit the sick people into hospital, not people who are just diagnosed with COVID-19. If you can cope at home, then you're left to be at home. But if you are desaturating or your fevers are uncontrollable and you're extremely ill, you're coming into hospital. Our ICUs are starting to get busier, and our general COVID wards are starting to get busier. So I think people's complacency is still around, and people aren't realizing that we are seeing cases at the moment. There are people dying in Gauteng. We know that. There are people dying in Cape Town. But because people don't know the names of the people, which is ethically and legally not allowed to be given out, people don't realize that it's people that they might know and people that are their next door neighbors that are being admitted into hospitals.
Is there still a stigma? Do you think that's what it is?
There definitely is still a stigma. With regards to HIV when it was diagnosed, there was a major stigma at that time. And once again, with this, the stigma is, if I've been in contact with somebody, but I've got something to do next week, I've got to be at work. And if I was in contact with that person and somebody finds out, then I can't be at work and then I shouldn't be at work. And someone will tell on somebody that will know that I will know that I've not been there. So there's a major stigma related to this type of thing. And people are scared about knowing that they've had this virus because other people's reactions will dictate what happens to them.
Right. All right. There's been a lot of questions, quite diverse this week, which is quite interesting because often we see the trend of questions around certain subjects. And now it seems to be fairly varied. Gillis says there's been a lot of speculations about labs, one specifically producing many false positives. Many people have received a positive result and then a negative one after going somewhere else. How can we be sure that the results that we are getting are accurate?
So I think more important than the false positive is the false negative result, okay? Because a lot of the time when you're exposed to the virus and you're in the beginning phase of the virus, you're going to have a negative result because depending on the amount of virus that you're shedding. That doesn't mean to say that 2 days later it can't turn positive because you're shedding more virus. There are some labs that have been putting out a lot of false positives, and then 2 days later there have been negative results coming out. But our belief as medical professionals is if you get a positive result, despite you getting a negative result 2 days later, isolate yourself for 14 days rather. Don't take the chance. There's a difference in the different types of swabs that are done. There's the nasopharyngeal swab that's done. There's the oropharyngeal swab that's done.
As well.
So the nasopharyngeal swabs aren't available at this point in time because they've run out of the reagents. Those are far more sensitive and far more specific. We've only got the oropharyngeal agents. Those are the swabs that are put at the back of the throat that make you gag and almost want to die. Those are the ones that are available at this point in time. And those are less sensitive and less specific. But you've also got to put into context, have you had any contact with anybody? Are you symptomatic? Is there a reason why you're testing? People shouldn't just be testing willy-nilly for the sake of it. We are running out of swabs. In the Western Cape, they are not testing everybody anymore because they don't have enough reagents. They are testing people over the age of 65 who have comorbidities or people who are sick or healthcare workers who are involved with patients. So we've got to be very careful about just testing everybody for the sake of it.
Okay, so how can we be certain about the numbers?
So we can't at this point in time, but we're seeing the trajectory and we're seeing the trend. There's a backlog at this point in time from anything from 20 to 60,000 cases that we still don't know. And that's a problem with the cases. We're seeing an exponential number growth in the last few days, 2,500, 2,700 cases. This is primarily due to the backlog of cases that are coming out, especially in the public sector. When in the private sector, you're getting a turnaround time of about 24 hours. In the public sector, you're getting a turnaround time of 5 to 7 days. So that backlog is sticking in at the moment and is starting to actually cause problems with the numbers. And that's why it's jading the numbers. We can't be 100% certain of the numbers, but we know that the numbers are coming out. They're not withholding the test results. It's just taking time to bring the numbers out.
Right. Gary says, is the latest novel coronavirus that causes COVID-19 getting weaker? Is 2% mortality rate in South Africa an accurate statistics? Is our response reasonable in Johannesburg based on the South African mortality rate?
So as I said, I think that is important because we are addressing it. We have hit the virus from an earlier point of view, knowing what to expect. We are doing a lot of things to try and prevent the virus from spreading, whether it's the public and social distancing, whether it was the longer lockdown, whether there's continued lockdown that's going on. We're in a better state after 90 days than the rest of the world was. What's going to happen in the next 90 days, we can't predict that at this point in time. But it's not a weaker strain. There's one strain of COVID-19. In Italy at the moment, they're looking at the genetic basis of the virus to see how it affects different people and how it affects the ACE2 receptors and why certain people get sicker and why certain people don't get sicker. But they're still doing tests on that to work out why. So we don't know just yet.
And we still seem to be confused around why some people seem to be these super spreaders and others aren't.
Yeah, we don't know that just yet, but we still do know that it's more the adults that are super spreaders and not the children that are the super spreaders. And I think speaking about that whole super spreader topic, there was an interview that came out with Prof. Salim Karim, the chairperson of the COVID-19 Ministerial Advisory Committee. And he said, we're going into a very tumultuous time at this point in time. We're going into winter. We're now going to have a dilemma with discerning the flu cases from the corona cases. They present very similarly. And we know that the flu cases cause severe disease in people and severe affectation. And a small cohort of patients with COVID get severe and life-threatening and death from the COVID disease. We're now going to have a large cohort of people coming into hospital with the flu-like symptoms and with the flu-like disease. They're going to be coming into hospital and they're going to be thought to be COVID-19 and not be treated as a flu virus. And then on the other aspect, they're going to come into hospital without COVID-19. And because the hospitals are going to be so full at that stage, there's a high chance of them getting exposed to COVID-19. So we're going to go through a bit of a rough patch with this winter period coming on now.
Susan says, well, if kids aren't super spreaders, can they see their grandchildren?
So I think it's a very important question.
Very difficult. And
it's a
people
very
really
emotional question.
Yeah,
okay? I'll tell you why. Because obviously we all want our children to see their grandparents. Obviously we can't go on forever without our children seeing our grandparents. But remember, the super spreader title came from the influenza vaccine, influenza virus. When people were spreading influenza, and that was children predominantly, over 50% of children spread influenza at school. And that was taken as this term super spreader. Children are not the super spreaders, but it doesn't mean that they can't transmit the virus. And our big problem now is we're now in level 3. So in level 3, parents are going back to work. People are getting exposed to other people. They're then coming back from work, and there's a high chance of them that they can be passing the virus to their children. So it's more likely that the children will get the virus from their parents than from being at school. That being said, the children are still highly transmissible people of passing the virus onto their grandparents. And grandparents are generally over the age of 60. They generally have got comorbidities with high blood pressure, diabetes, obesity, COPD, and any other problem. And the last thing you want in the world is for your grandchild to infect one of your parents. And it's all very well to say that, well, is it okay for my child then to sit, in the garden with the grandparents? But you take a 4-year-old, a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old, and you try and keep them away from hugging their grandparents, or you take an emotional grandparent and you try and keep them away. It's basically impossible, and it's not fair to the children or the grandparents to put them in that type of position.
Very, very difficult. How long do you foresee this going on for? Is there a light at the end of the tunnel? Is there a period, if we say September, October, December, that
look, if we go with the experts, and if we go with Prof. Salim and what he says, he's expecting the peak in July, August, and this could continue until October, but we don't know. We've got to follow the trends. We've got to see what happens over the winter period now. No one can predict. We're all professionals and we're all experts, except not one of us is an expert, because no one knows, because this is a novel virus and we are still learning on a day-to-day basis.
Well, it was actually quite interesting, because I see the World Health Organization had been standing by a theory that you shouldn't be wearing face masks. Have now retracted that and suggested that everybody should be wearing face masks.
Well, they kind of retracted it. Well done. Kudos to the World Health Organization for getting on track. I mean, with the CDC and the rest of the world, we should be on track for the number of past weeks. But they've also said that maybe the people over the age of 65 with comorbidities should wear surgical masks. So I don't think the World Health Organization is the body to follow at this point in time. I would rather follow something like the CDC in America or the NICD here, which is on the ball completely, and see from there where we're going.
What's also interesting to me is that there does seem to be a bit of a political, what I've perceive as a political bent around this. I saw that Lancet publication published an article about the dangers of hydrochloroquine. It seemed it was then shown to be a dubious study. That had to be retracted. In the meantime, the World Health Organization had pulled the testing around hydrochloroquine. Now it's back. Is this politics? Is this ignorance? Is this just nobody knowing what they're doing?
I think there's all of the above. Okay, I think there's pressure from the whole world. There's pressure from government bodies. There's pressure from people just wanting answers. And I think the whole hydroxychloroquine analysis, which was published in the Lancet Journal, as well as in the New England Journal of Medicine, has recently been retracted due to the integrity of the study. Now, there's a different spin on it, whereas the Indian journals have shown that there still is a benefit from hydroxychloroquine. So, albeit that we're not using it first line, and we're actually not using it ourselves at the moment, it doesn't mean that in 1 day or 5 days' time we're going to change our minds. But what it does mean is that all these people that have stockpiled hydroxychloroquine at home should not be using it and should never be using it in the first place at home. It's not a drug that should be used at home. It's a drug that should be used in hospital. And whilst we're speaking about drugs, let's talk about another twist. In the French studies, there were the studies that showed that you shouldn't be using anti-inflammatories such as ibuprofen. There's now a study being done in London, which shows that ibuprofen, not as over-the-counter ibuprofen, but in a lipid-soluble phase, which you can't get over-the-counter, is being used as a study for a treatment to try and prevent mechanical ventilation in patients. So this is going to change on a day-to-day basis, and we're going to see what that's going to show us. You know, every sort of analysis is going to be done from different people, and we'll see what that shows. From a treatment point of view, we're still seeing very good results from convalescent plasma, and that is basically giving plasma to people who've got antibodies to the virus and are donating the plasma to give to people who are sick, and that's decreasing the fatality and the mortality rate as well as the people stay in hospital. So we are seeing an improvement from that point of view as well.
What is the first line that you use in the hospitals here?
It also depends on how sick the patient is, and it depends on what their symptoms are and what the oxygen saturations are and what their bloods are. And remember, we look for an hyperinflammatory phase. We look at what we call the CRP, which is a C-reactive protein. Some studies can look at interleukin-6 levels. We look at ferritin levels. We look at troponin levels. We look at a whole basis, the D-dimer. And our basis of treatment in hospital is our vitamins, which we've discussed before, vitamin D, zinc, niacin, vitamin C, as well as some people are using azithromycin still. And then we look at other things like corticosteroids in the hyperinflammatory state, together with drugs like interleukin-6 inhibitors, such as tocilizumab. We don't have remdesivir available in this country, the antiviral. We don't have convalescent plasma available just yet, but the SANBS are doing trials and studies on that, and I believe that will be available shortly. What shortly means, I don't know just yet. And we wait to see what will happen from that point of view.
Linda, let's just talk about some of the practicalities around it. Linda says, is a face shield sufficient protection, or should one wear a face mask with the shield?
So if you're a healthcare worker and you're seeing patients, then a face mask is not sufficient. You need a face mask and a face shield. If you're walking on the street, like I saw people yesterday with a face shield and no mask, that's completely insufficient, and you're going to do yourself damage and do yourself harm. You can spread the virus because it pours out the sides. You're not protecting your mouth. Do people actually have to walk around with face shields and face masks? I don't believe so at this point in time. Remember, the mask is stopping you from spreading the virus to people and stopping other people from spreading the virus to you. Some studies are showing that eye protection does help as well. So if you're wearing glasses, it does help. But if you're wearing a mask and they're wearing a mask, that's sufficient for now.
Right. My sister says, Merle Kaplan teaches special kids. What advice do you give? They can't wear masks. She's over 60. It's only about 3 kids, but they do dribble. They do, they can't wear masks, which is a huge problem.
So with special needs kids, I believe it would probably be quite difficult to do a Zoom or a Google Classroom type of interaction, and you need that interaction with them. That being said, if you're over the age of 60 and you've got comorbidities, you shouldn't be involved there. You should get somebody else to do it. But if you are okay and you are healthy, then in that type of scenario, you do need a mask, you do need a visor, you should be wearing an apron, especially if they are dribbling, and you should be wearing gloves that you change between every single period so that you're protecting yourself from all aspects. When you go home, you take off your shoes, you take off your clothes, and you wash and you change your clothes every single day and try and protect yourself from that point of view.
Phillips wants to know, if the COVID-19 illness involves blood clotting, then aren't blood thinners like warfarin useful as a prophylaxis?
So that's a very good question, because as part of our treatment, we also do use anticoagulation. We're using drugs like Clexane, which is an injectable, enoxaparin, which is a drug which is injected into you to stop clotting. We look at every patient that comes in and gets a prophylactic injection that are sick patients, okay, to prevent them from getting clots, because there's a high prevalence of clotting in this disease. And then patients with a higher D-dimer get full anticoagulation. A D-dimer is a marker of clotting in the body. That being said, we do not give prophylactic anticoagulation to people at home who are not sick and to people who don't have symptoms or signs of the disease. You cannot give prophylaxis for every single disease because there will be other side effects. And one of the major side effects of anticoagulants is bleeding. You can fall, you can hit your head, you can bleed to death, you can have bleeding from your nostrils, bleeding from your gums, and bleeding from any of the orifices. It's very unsafe to start yourself on prophylactic anticoagulation.
A few people have asked me about sport, exercise, and sweat. Does the virus, is it virus transmitted through sweat?
Remember, it's a respiratory virus that is transmitted through droplets. It's not transmitted through sweat. But if you're at a gym and everyone's sweating and everyone's using the same equipment, then they're touching the equipment, there's a higher chance of spreading the virus. And you've got to clean all the equipment in between. There's other studies that show that it can be transmitted through feces. There's 1 or 2 studies show that, but there's no general study to show there's a fecal oral transmission of the virus at this point in time. So it's unlikely to be transmitted via sweat, but I wouldn't go and hug your sports colleague, and I wouldn't be involved in sports matches at this point in time. Unless you're part of the Premier League, and when you're part of Liverpool and you're about to win the Premier League title, that's a completely
Then
different.
you're allowed. Okay, I see the special dispensation. Carla says, I'm very eager to know about the Pareto principle. I don't know what this is, which is being compared to the 80/20 spread of the virus as it's a key trait of transmission.
So the Pareto principle is an 80/20 sort of principle, okay? And I think with this, it means if 80% of people are dying or getting sick or have got severe corona disease, only 20% of that population fulfills that 80% criteria. So we're talking about and I think this in America, this doesn't hold for us at this point in time, but if 20% of your population are over the age of 65 and are getting sick and dying from the thing, why do you have to involve the 80% of the population? And there's people like that are saying, is there a role for lockdown? Is there a role for thing? And I don't believe that that holds any truth with us at this point in time, because we're seeing people who are over the age of 40, over the age of 45, anything between the age of 40 to 60, equivalent to people over the age of 70, 80 at this point in time who are dying from the disease. So it's not just people over the age of 80, it's people with multiple comorbidities, TB, HIV, COPD, diabetes, hypertension, obesity. So those people are much more involved. So I don't believe the 80/20 Pareto principle is holding water at this point in time in South Africa.
Your view on places of worship opening. There's a lot of talk that on June the 16th, there's going to be a decision made as to whether, for example, synagogues are going to open. Give me your thoughts on that.
I think it's very dangerous, and I do not believe any of the synagogues should open on the 16th of June. We are going into a severe crisis. The hospitals are filling up, and we know that at places of worship, this is where the virus is spread. It's all good and well that people will hold to the rules for 2 or 3 days, but that's human nature. After 2 or 3 days, people get lax. People will pass books to each other. People will pass cell phones to each other. People will do things that they can't control anymore. And it's a huge social hub. Whether you've got 20 people there, where you've got 30 people there, it's a social hub. That's what our synagogues are. People go there, they go there to pray, but they also go there to get socially enhanced by their people around there. And we're not going to be able to avoid that. And in my view, and a lot of my colleagues' view, we should stay away from the synagogues and houses of worship and private synagogues and private houses of worship at this time. It's criminal to start that off now, and we are looking for major trouble.
Your thoughts, though, what I noticed yesterday, especially now that we've entered lockdown level 3, is that there were a number of private homes that these services that housed these services. I know that people were quite careful about it. Is it better to have that versus a formal synagogue? Is it better to have none of them? Is it?
It's better to have none of them at this point in time. When you say people are quite careful, people are as careful as they can be, but they're not careful. People don't understand the intricacies of the virus, how it's spread, how the fomite spread of the virus from dust or from particles being spread from books. And even if you bring your own book, and even if you touch this and you touch that, it's impossible to withhold that in that type of scenario. And a lot of the people that are going to religious sort of gatherings are people over the age of 60. And it's people with comorbidities. And even if you've got a controlled environment, because these private ones are not controlled environments. In a controlled environment, it might be easier to control it, but for a limited time only. But in these private establishments, you can't control anything there.
The argument, of course, is that places of work are opening, that our kids are going back to schools. Why not places of worship? Your response?
And we understand that schools are opening where we're sending kids to school who are not the super spreaders, who are not categorically getting sick all the time. And if they do get sick, they don't get unwell, okay? They are social distancing. They are keeping more than 1.5 meters. It's strict. It's by the Department of Education, the Department of Health. It's strict. They have to follow it to the letter. And if they don't follow it, they'll be closed down. Who's guaranteeing that's happening at these private worship places or these private synagogues or at any of these communal gatherings? Going back to work, every single work sort of station that you speak or go to, or where people are going, are under the Labor Department. They will be fined if they do not comply to all these laws. They have to have the social distancing. They have to have hand washing. They have to have masks. They have to have more than 1.5 meters between people. You cannot guarantee that in places of worship at this point in time.
Andy wants to know, can COVID be transmitted on paper, exam paper, notes printed for lessons, etc.?
So we do know that COVID does stay around on surfaces, and I think with paper and that you can wait about 24 hours if you're worried without people touching them.
Mm-hmm. All right. And anything else that we need to know? Any other message that you would want to share?
I think we've got to actually go to our good news segment of the podcast. Okay,
we're going to be talking unicorns, aren't we?
Yeah. Well, before that, there's even better news than that. Okay?
Oh, excellent! Yeah.
I don't know if you know, but the Earth narrowly escaped a giant asteroid which was due to hit us yesterday. It was the size of the Empire State Building, and that missed us. So kudos to the Earth for that, because we missed a huge explosion there. Okay.
Can you imagine preventing COVID and then dying from an asteroid? It's
that would be terrible. Okay. And I think I'd like to quote John F. Kennedy, who said, "Our efforts and our courage are not enough without purpose and direction." So in other words, be vigilant and be aware. And remember, always be yourself, unless you can be a unicorn, because only a unicorn can stab idiots with their heads.
All right. Very deep words there from the COVID expert, Dr. Anton Meyberg. Thank you, as always. We'll be back next Sunday. That'll be the 14th episode, the 14th Sunday in a row. Thank you, as always, for your time. This has been the Synthesis Sunday podcast. I'm Howard Feldman. Have a fantastic day. Stay safe and wash your hands.